So maybe you're filming in an office or a bedroom, maybe you want to shoot a documentary or an interview in a small space, or maybe you're just thinking about starting vlogging. Which lens do you go for? Let's check out some options. Yeah, that's not going to work. Nope, not going to do it. No. No. Almost there. And I reckon that's just about right. So it depends what you want to do, and it depends on the camera body you're using as well. I'm using the Canon APS-C crop sensor bodies, so that'd be the same for you if you're using the compact mirrorless system like the M series, or if you're using a 100 series or a Rebel series, so that'd be like the 600D, the 750D, or like the T3i or the T6i. Or if you've got something a bit more substantial like the Canon 80D or the Canon 90D. So that's what I'm shooting on here. So if that's what you're after, you've come to the right place. So for wider angle lenses, there may be other options, but here are my suggestions. Now it may be that you're using a kit lens already like the Canon 18 to 55mm IS STM lens, but I'm guessing you're watching this video because it's not quite cutting it. If you're using the Canon M series mirrorless, then if you've got the kit lens that's a 15 to 45mm, then actually that's a pretty good wide angle lens already, and you may be absolutely fine with that. So if you're going to be vlogging on a wider angle lens, then 14 to 18mm is really going to help you out, and that's going to be wider than your standard kit lens. Now if you go wider than 14mm, you get a lot more in the frame. That might be exactly what you're going for. It shows your environment. If you're going to do some big landscape stuff or architectural stuff, it's going to be awesome, but there's a danger with them as well, because they're not going to be flattering for your face. So yeah, if your face is in the middle of the frame, you may be okay, but as soon as you get away from that, it's not a flattering look. So this is actually shooting at 10mm at the moment, but I prefer 14, a little bit better, and you can still see plenty of the environment that we're in. So my recommendation, if you're looking for something lightweight, cheap, and on a Canon EFS crop sensor, is the Canon 10 to 18mm f4.5 to 5.6 IS STM. You don't have to have blurry backgrounds for vlogging, but if you wanted something with better optics or better in low light, you could look at a Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8. There are some drawbacks with that though. It's heavier, there's no image stabilization, so you'd need to put it on a gimbal or something like that, and 18mm might not be wide enough for you. So if I'm shooting in an office or a smaller room, I much prefer to shoot at 24 to 35mm, if at all possible. This is shooting at 28mm at the moment. Why do I like it? Well, there's less lens distortion, so it's a bit more flattering for the face. And actually, if I can get some distance from the background, I can get a shallow depth of field with an aperture like f1.8 or f2, and you get a little bit of separation. So I think that looks absolutely great. But maybe you've not got the space to do that, or you can't get the camera angle that you wanted to get. Or maybe you want to be able to reach your camera controls, hit the touch screen. You know, if in this situation, I'm still another foot away from touching the controls. So that's no good if you need to be able to do that. So you might want to look at some wider options. So I've just switched lenses over, and you can see compared to the 28mm we were shooting on, this at 14mm is so much wider. Now I hate the shot, it's really messy, it's not going to work for me, so I'm going to change back over in a moment. But what you can see is, in a smaller space, I can get so much closer to the camera lens, and also I'll be able to touch the screen, because if I'm here, I can reach the screen absolutely easily, no problem from there. So yeah, that's 14mm, folks. Now unless your space is really small, 14mm or wider is probably overkill. So let's just look for comparison what it's like at 18mm. Now, the frame's not good here, I still think it's too messy, but actually you'll see that I can still get a lot closer to the camera, and I'd still be able to just about control it from the touch screen if that's what I wanted to do. But yeah, for me, if we can get to 28mm to 35, it looks so much better. So if your camera is going to be locked off on a tripod, or if you're going to carefully put it on a shelf or a desk or maybe a pile of boxes, make sure it's not going to fall off. Be careful, guys. But in those situations, you don't need image stabilization. And so I would highly recommend the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8. It's a beautiful lens. The images are great. I just love the quality of it. And it's really flexible because you can get the 18, which is almost wide on a crop sensor, to 35, which is a standard, and that looks absolutely fantastic. But no image stabilization. But that'd be my recommendation, the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8. So if you're shooting an interview or a documentary, you're probably going to be behind the camera. Now, I'd still recommend the Sigma 18 to 35 f1.8 for that. It's a brilliant lens, it's going to look great, and you've still got a bit of flexibility with that 18 to 35mm zoom. But if you're looking for something cheaper on a budget, you may want to consider the Canon 50mm f1.8, what we call the Nifty 50. So 50mm is a standard lens for a full frame camera, but on a crop sensor camera, for me, it's just a little bit too zoomed in for working indoors. And actually, when I shot a documentary, I had problems getting the right camera angle that I wanted, and this was just too long a lens. So I much prefer 35mm. This is the Canon 35mm f2. We talked about quite a few options there, and I'm going to put up some footage so you can see what each lens looks like, and I'll put up some extra information alongside. But what about affordability? Let's start with the Canon EFS 10 to 18mm f4.5 to 5.6 IS lens. It's image stabilized. This was the really wide angle lens we were shooting on, although if you remember I was saying 14 to 18mm is usable. I don't like the 10 to 14mm side of things. Too wide, too messy for me, but it might be what you're going for. Now these are reasonably cheap. They've got the plastic mount rather than a metal mount, which keeps the cost down. The build quality is okay, but you're going to pick them up at a reasonable price. Here in the UK they go for £250 brand new, but I picked this up about £150 used in great condition. So the cheapest option is the Canon EF 50mm f1.8. Now I think this is too zoomed in for most of what we've been talking about today. I found these hard to work with in a smaller room, so I wouldn't recommend this lens actually for the situations we're talking about. But 50mm f1.8, things look beautiful with it. You've got loads of light in there. It's not image stabilized, but it's cheap. So you may be tempted to go for this because in the UK you can pick these up for £100 brand new. Used you can go probably £60 to £80 for the latest version, which is the one with the metal lens mount. But yeah, sorry guys, as good as this lens is, I don't recommend this for smaller spaces, and so actually I think you guys need to look at the other options. Here we're going into the two more expensive options. I love this lens. This is the Canon EF 35mm f2 IS. Image stabilized, makes it such a good general purpose walk around lens for video. I've used this for most of my footage when I've traveled, when I've shot stuff, when I've done YouTube content. The f2 is absolutely fantastic. The image stabilization is really helpful, and I would say this is a superb lens for most of the situations we're talking about. Can you use it for vlogging? Not a chance on a crop sensor. Is it the best for a really tight space? Not really. But for the interview, office setup, for documentary, yeah, it's a fantastic lens. What about the price? Here in the UK, they go for £500 brand new at the moment. They've come down a bit in price. But used, you can actually pick them up for £400, which is an absolute bargain for a superb video lens. And last but by no means least is the Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8, which is the lens we've got on now. It's the most expensive of the four options we've talked about. There are drawbacks with the size, with the weight, with the lack of image stabilization. But if you're going to be using a stabilizer, a tripod, a slider, it looks absolutely fantastic. The optics are superb. Probably the best in terms of flexibility of all the lenses we've looked at today. It's growing to be one of my favorites, but it might not be wide enough for the vlogging side of things or if you're in a really tight space. But definitely highly, highly, highly recommended. What about the affordability? So here in the UK they go for about £600 brand new at the moment, and used you can pick one up between £400 and £500 in a really good condition. So yeah, those are my recommendations. I hope you found that useful. This is DSLR Rookie signing off. My name's Tim, and we'll see you next time on this channel. See ya.